crying before I even get up here. It don't take much to get me crying, more does it, Kate? That's something that's still not as much as it was right after my mini stroke. I became very emotional about everything. I mean, I cried watching the movie Elf. It's a very funny Christmas movie, and I cried during that movie right after I had the stroke. I forget what part it was, but it didn't seem to matter. We watched an action movie with The Rock. What it was, San Andreas? Mm-hmm. And I cried. I'm sitting there in the movie theater crying. I'm like, what is wrong with me? Anyway, I found out there was a side effect, is a possible side effect of having a stroke. But I have been I'm not as emotional as I was then, but I'm probably not as unemotional as I was before, which is probably a good thing. Well, I've always been emotional. I've just always been able to hide it from people, to be honest. I remember not too long ago, my son was sitting next to me. He was at church. He was having a remembrance of 9/11 that Sunday. And I don't know how old he was, 10, something like that, 8, 10. Anyway, during part of it, tears are streaming down my face. And he's sitting there staring at me. And of course, he said later, he said, "Dad, it was the first time I've ever seen you cry." And it actually hurt me, because I thought, I've cried a lot, actually. But I always try to hide it from people, I suppose, without even intending to do so. So, no more hiding. All right, if you would turn with me to the book of Exodus. What was my voice? Going back to my adolescence. Chapter 17. Book of Exodus, chapter 17. Here, leading up to this, we have seen God do amazing things with Israel. We all know that Israel was held captive by Egypt for many, many, many years, hundreds of years. They were cruel to them. And then there was a man named Moses that was born and actually was raised by Pharaoh's household. And then found out later that he was actually a Jew. Of course, he tried to prevent an Egyptian soldier or slave taskmaster from beating on a Jew, and he ended up killing the guy. And then, of course, even the Jews kind of turned on at that point. And so he ran away and hid away in the desert for a long time. And one day, God comes knocking to the form of a burning bush, calling him to a special mission. And remember, he was about 80 years old at that point. He was about 40 when he fled. He was about 80 when he was called to go on this mission. In our modern society, we think of 80 years old as being the time that you're hanging things up, right? We're done. You know, we're retired or whatever the case is, but he's being called to a special mission by God at the age of 80. And God did seem to give him supernatural powers at times. In fact, it said when he died at, 120, that he still had strength. The gleam had not diminished from his eye. He wasn't just barely getting along, crippling right along, like many of us would at that age. Not Carl, but he's kind of like Moses in that respect. But many by the age of 80, we're ready to just say, forget it. Moses was still going strong. Even on the day that he died, he was still a strong man. So God blessed him and gave him the strength that he needed to carry on and do the mission that he had called for him. The one thing that he demanded from Moses was obedience, right? And trusting in God. Same thing he demands from us. Our obedience to him and trusting in him that he will help us. And sometimes that gets hard. But many times, those of us who need him the most, in those times, we turn on him the most. And we're going to look at one of those times where that happened. After all the amazing things that God did for the nation of Israel, he got them out of Egypt, convinced Pharaoh to let them go, and to send them off better off than they were. People were giving them stuff. Here, take this, take livestock, take jewels, take whatever. Just go with our blessing, get out of here. And then after they left, we know that Pharaoh came after them, had a change of heart, decided to go after them, destroy them. Here they are in front of the Red Sea, trapped. And yet, God said, don't worry. Moses went to God and God, don't worry, just raise your hands out over the sea. And he parted the Red Sea. Can you imagine being there, seeing that happen? And then a short time later, deciding that God wasn't going to help you out anymore and turning on him. That's basically what happened not too long after that event, after all the amazing things that God did for Israel. They came to chapter 17 and they are upset with Moses and with God about what was going on. Verse 17 says, and all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin after their journeys according to the commandment of the Lord, and pitched in Rephidim. And there was no water for the people to drink. So they go to a place here, they're traveling out through all of this wilderness and come to a place where there's no water to drink. And that's a real concern, right? Not having water. And we don't really understand that concern. If I want water, I just go get me one of these or turn on the faucet and we have water. But they're out there in the wilderness, they did not have that. And so without water, our bodies will eventually die. Now, how many days is it you can go without water this way? Is it 8 days? Or is it less than that? Maybe it's 8 days without food, 3 days without water. And your body will get dehydrated. When I went to the ER a week ago, I was severely dehydrated. And I was still drinking, trying to keep stuff down. It just wouldn't stay down. But when I went in, they had to give me 2 bags of fluid to get me back up to where I needed to be. And so that's just a little taste. You start running out of water and you have no place to get it. It's a real concern. It's a need. Now, did God know there was a need? Absolutely. He's the one that made us, right? He knows exactly what our bodies need to operate. So here they are. They're in a place and there's no water. A real concern. Wherefore the people did chide with Moses and said, give us water that we may drink. And Moses said unto them, why chide ye with me? Wherefore do ye tempt the Lord? Tempt the Lord. So here they are. They come. They're not just asking. Now listen, if they had went to Moses and said, Moses, look, we're out of water. You probably already know this. I'm sure Moses knew. We don't have any water to drink. We're going to need water. Can you go to the Lord and ask him for water? Because we know he can provide. Now that would be trusting God, right? Seeing the need that we have, knowing there's nothing we can do about it, and then turning to God and saying, hey, we need your help. But instead they go and they start complaining, they're chiding, they're murmuring, they're accusing him. And here in a minute we're going to see the accusation here that they throw at Moses and ultimately at God, because Moses is God's man, his mouthpiece to the people. It says, and the people thirst there for water. And the people murmured against Moses and said, wherefore is this that thou hast brought us up out of Egypt, to kill us and our children and our cattle with thirst? And so they go to Moses and they're going, you brought us out here. In other words, why didn't you just leave us in Egypt? Why didn't you just leave us there? And this isn't the first time that they've done this, right? They went to him a couple of times, at least one other time before we get to this point, saying, why did you take us out of Egypt? There we had leeks to eat. We had food to eat. Yeah, we were mistreated. Yeah, we were abused. Yeah, some of us have probably died. But at least we had food. And so they did not trust God, and it went very quickly. Their trust in God left them very quickly. And again, in my mind, I go back to, he just parted the Red Sea to allow you to escape on dry land, not on muddy land. You didn't get stuck, but you were able to go through. And remember, this was millions of people going through, not just a few. The Red Sea would have to part it a good distance and gave them enough time and room for them all to get through before Pharaoh got there. And they could already see Pharaoh coming off in the distance. And so that was amazing. But yet they're looking at the situation saying, we're going to die. God saved us just so we can die out here by thirst. And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, what shall I do unto this people? They be almost ready to stone me. And so now they didn't say they were going to stone him, but I'm going to take Moses' word for this, that the way they were acting was as though they would just as soon stone him. And overthrow him is to wait to see what the Lord had to say. Some people say, well, Moses was overreacting a little bit here. Who knows? I don't know. God doesn't call him out for it. And so I think that he was seeing from the people that there was a mutiny coming. There were people that wanted rid of him. They weren't trusting him. And ultimately, they weren't trusting God anymore. Even though he has already saved them from Egypt. He saved them from Egypt another time by the Red Sea. He gave them food when they needed food. And now they're not trusting him once again. And maybe because of that statement that they're ready to stone me, maybe that's why God tells them to do what he did. I'm not sure, it doesn't tell us, but just maybe. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go on before the people, and take with thee of the elders of Israel, and thy rod, wherewith thou smotest the river, take in thy hand, and go. So what do you think he said, go take the elders of Israel as well? For a witness? So they can come back, if they can tell the people, be a witness on behalf of the people. God gave us water from a rock. And so he told them to go out there and take his staff. And again, it may not sound like the smartest thing to do in that situation. From a human standpoint, they might have been, why are we going out here? There's no water any place around. Why are we going out here with other men? Shouldn't just one person die looking for water instead of several others? Don't know what they were thinking, but just thinking about things that I know that might enter my head, or people I know that might enter their head in this situation. But many times God tells us to go do things that makes no sense to us. And that's on purpose. Why? Because it makes sense to us, then we could come up with it on our own. We could even take credit for it in the long run. But when it's something that makes no sense and is not even possible to happen, then God is glorified. But that's when it comes in where we start wondering if we can't trust him or not, isn't it? We don't say it outright many times, but I don't know how God is going to get me out of this situation. And therefore, we don't trust him to do it. We turn our backs to him, or we try other means, or whatever the case is, instead of waiting on him. And sometimes waiting on him is hard. And sometimes he makes us wait even longer than we think that we should have to wait. We want immediate satisfaction on whatever it is right now. With finances, want immediate satisfaction so I can pay my bills, right? With injuries, we want immediate satisfaction so we can be over the pain and the injuries that we have. Leslie knows that good and well. Jessica knows that good and well. To a lesser extent, I know that good and well here recently. Especially with my nausea. I actually, even though it was just for a week that I felt that bad, and for a day that I felt that bad, where I ended up going to the ER, it crossed my mind, I'd just rather die than go on like this. It was the same thought I had after my mini stroke when I went for 2 weeks straight throwing up like that. Couldn't stop. I remember thinking, Lord, I'll just take it. I'm ready to go. If this is the life I'm going to have from now on. And having that thought is okay. It's when we don't trust God and try to take that thought into our own hands, right? And we decide, I can't live like this. I'm just going to end it now. Now I'll joke with the kids every time I feel bad like that. I'll say, okay, now I'll just throw, Zane, go get the shotgun. Go ahead and load the shotgun. And I think I told Kaylee first, I said, Kaylee, go get the shotgun. I said, you might need to load it. And she's like, why? And I said, I might need to be put out of my misery here, so just go get it ready, go get it loaded. Dad. Then I say, Zane, go get the shotgun. Okay. He takes a few steps back towards the bedroom. But in the end, he said, nah, all I got is buckshot, so it probably just hurt me really bad. He'd have to shoot me over and over and over. Then he got a gleam in his eye. But he didn't go through with it. But sometimes we feel so bad, we just rather go on. But that's when it's hard to trust God, isn't it? It's when we say, well, God, what are you doing? Why am I going through this pain? And it can be an emotional pain. It can be whatever pain it is that we're going through. Keeping our trust in God and our sights on God is how we get through it. We can look back in our life and think, was he ever failed me? Once? Ever? And if you can ever say that God has failed you, even once, then you might have a reason to say, well, I just don't trust God right now, because he failed me once. I don't believe any of us could actually say that. What we do is we fail God. We walk away from him. I know I certainly can't say that. We've had ups and downs and good times and bad times, and we've had, it's really been a roller coaster ride ever since I got into the ministry. It's been just constantly up and down, up and down. I mentioned my manager even asked me, well, how can you keep trusting God? Obviously, he's not looking out for you. And I go, oh, yes, he is. Oh, yes, he is. The only reason I got through these things is because of him. And if he sends me into another one, it seems like we've been in one since we've been here. We haven't left it yet, but but trusting God to get us through it, to make the difference in our lives. We've got to depend on Him. So anyway, He sends Moses and the elders out with His rod. He says, take that rod. And He says, behold, I will stand before thee there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. And so these guys are going to be a witness to this, saying that God is bringing water from a rock. Tapping it simply with a staff. They're seeing what Moses is able to do through God's power simply by being obedient to God. Now listen, if he wasn't obedient, and we know that Moses, at a latter time, a similar situation, wasn't completely obedient. God told him to strike the rock once. He struck it twice. God still gave him water. Still blessed him, even through his disobedience, and blessed the people. But there was a price that Moses had to pay for that. He took his eyes off of God. It can happen to any of us at any moment. If we take our eyes off of God, even for a moment, we can get into that room of disobedience, that moment of stepping away from Him, and then facing the consequences of what comes after that. And there are consequences in this life of turning our back on God and ignoring God. Now, if you're a saved child of God, then we will not face the final consequence, right? We will not face eternity in hell and eventually the lake of fire. We will not go through that if we are a saved child of God, no matter what we do. Because it's not about us, it's about what Jesus did for us. And that's having that trust and faith in Him, believing we are sealed until the day of redemption. But we can pay the price severely in this life. There's always a consequence to our sinful actions and not obeying God. Some big, some small, but there's always consequence. And so he goes out and he strikes the rock, and Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the chiding of the children of Israel, because they tempted the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? And those names simply mean just that. Massah, or actually the correct pronunciation from what I looked up is Massah. It's Massah, and that means tempted. Or being the one that is tempted, as they tempted the Lord, if I can spit it out. And then the next name there, Meribah, simply means complaining, striving, the whole chiding thing going on. And so, as with many of these names, he names it something that goes right along with what the people were doing, marking it as not a good thing necessarily, but as a remembrance to all who come after what happened there with the children of Israel, not trusting God and turning their back on Him even briefly, and yet God still blessed them because of Moses' obedience. So God blesses everyone there, millions of people, because Moses was obedient and obeyed God. Isn't that amazing? They all deserve to die of thirst, turn their back on God like that. They all deserved it. But they all were saved because of one man. Moses was obedient to God's call, and as that leader, in the position that God put him in, his blessing became their blessing. Kind of reminds you of something, doesn't it? How we are blessed by one man. We all deserve to die in eternity forever to be in the lake of fire. We deserve that because there's not a person alive that's not a sinner that doesn't deserve it. And yet because of what one man did, Jesus Christ, His salvation is given to us. What He owns, what He truly will receive as an heir of God, He gives to us. He shares with us. And we don't deserve it whatsoever. And so here the water comes out of the rock. And so again, God saved them amazingly. And so here we're going to get into another, we're going to read on it and see there's another situation here. It definitely does not make any sense. Again, Moses, surely you would think, would be challenged to think, even for a second, God, are you sure? Are you sure this is what you want me to do? Then came Amalek and fought with Israel and Rephidim. So here comes, they get through this. We don't know exactly how long, but it appears to be not very long after they get water. Here comes Amalek to fight against them. And Moses said to Joshua, choose us out men and go and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. Now right there, the modern army was saying, their general said, okay guys, we're going to go out. This force is probably bigger, stronger, more powerful than you. You're going to go out and fight them. You tell your lead man, your captain, whoever's in charge of the fighting men, you take them on out and fight. I'm going up here on the hill and I'm just going to hold my gun up over my head. I think, are you crazy? Why would you do that? What is that going to do? We might need you down here fighting with us. You notice Joshua, the obedience of Joshua. Man, we talked about last week how he was very true to Moses. He was loyal to Moses and to God. And God used him in a mighty way after Moses to become the leader of Israel. So Joshua did as Moses had said of him and fought with Amalek. Joshua was a warrior. He was a fighter. That's what he did. So he was the head of the army. And so Moses gave him an order of what to do. He simply did it. We don't see any proof here in Scripture of him having any doubts or saying, I don't know about that, Moses. You sure? Now, could it have been? Yeah, I guess there could have been. The Scripture, whatever it wasn't enough for God to share it. Moses just obeyed. Joshua just obeyed and went out. He trusted Moses, and he knew Moses was God's man. And so ultimately he trusted God. And so his faith was in the one that was above Moses. And so he simply went out and did what he told him to do. So he goes up on the hill. It says, so Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and went up to the top of the hill. Notice Moses didn't go alone to stand on top of the hill. I said before that God had given Moses some supernatural abilities. His strength to stay even at 120 years old, for him to still have full use of his body, to still be a strong man, basically a young man in the way that he acted at that age. So we might wonder, well, why didn't God give him supernatural abilities coming up on here? When God calls us to do something, he doesn't always give us the supernatural ability or clear the path for us, does he? We saw that last week with Joshua having to go in and take the land. When Israel first got to the land and sent in the spies, remember there were 2 men that said, let's go, God's on our side. The other 10 was like, we can't go, man, we're outnumbered, we're like grasshoppers in their sight. We can't do it. And therefore they paid the price for that. But God many times has us to go through the motions of doing the thing that is required to be done in a war, to go fight the war. They physically had to fight. They physically had to take the land of Canaan. But God was the one that was with them as long as they obeyed him. And he was the one that allowed them to be successful against all odds. Just as our country has been so blessed over the years with the Revolutionary War. We should have been destroyed by England. Most powerful army in the world at that time. Most powerful navy. They were the biggest kingdom. They were everything. They had it all. And how could a bunch of ragtag people here in this country have a chance against them? But yet God bless. And there's been debate, and we had debate in Bible college, were the colonial people really right in rebelling against the government? Because the Bible tells us to obey our governments. Were they really in the right by doing so? And of course there's been discussion back and forth, and it can go on and on and on. But the fact of the matter is God blessed them and allowed them to win. So they must have done something right. Same way with the Civil War. Now, men of God were on both sides of the Civil War. You know, the Stonewall Jackson, most people don't even know. I remember when he was in Tampa. There's a church there in Virginia, I think? I think it was Virginia. That to this day, or at least to that day, back in 2007, 2008, were celebrating Stonewall Jackson. And guess what? This was an all-black Baptist church. They celebrated Stonewall Jackson, a Confederate soldier. And they celebrated him every year. Why? Because he's the one that got that church started. It was his money that helped establish that church. He went and taught Sunday school there for those people, for those kids. And he did this every time that he could. He was around. He was there helping them. He was a strong man of faith, and he fought for the Confederacy. Most people say, well, there's no way. He could have been, because he was all for slavery. It wasn't what you all know. It wasn't what it was all about, was it? The same way on the north side, there was plenty of Christian men. Abraham Lincoln is the one that stands out. Man that would say, it's not a question of whether God is on our side. The question is whether are we on his side. And that is the question. Are we on God's side? But in a situation like that, even though there are good Christian men on both sides of the battle, there had to be a winner, there had to be a loser. And God seemed to bless the army that probably should have lost. Did not have the best generals. The Confederate army's generals were some of the best probably in the world at that time. But God overcame. And so here we got this situation where they're going out and fighting the Amalek army, and Moses is going up on the hill to hold his staff up over his head. And it came to pass, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. So it didn't matter what was happening down there, what they were doing. As long as Moses kept his hands up, kept the staff up over his head, Israel would win. But when he got tired and it came down, Amalek would win. So how can that make a difference? One was being obedient to God. And even though it wasn't due to his lack of trying, he became weak and became disobedient to God simply through his human weakness. But God, guess what? He didn't go alone, did he? He didn't go up there alone, because God many times gives us a mission to do and a way to carry it out, and he doesn't have us carry it out alone. He puts other people there to help us, to support us. And so when his hands got weak, it said, but Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone, the other two men, Aaron and Hur, took a stone and put it under him, gave him a place to sit down. And he sat thereon, and Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, the one on one side and the other on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. So one man on each side, holding his hands up for him, because he couldn't do it anymore. So God gave Moses a mission to do. He didn't tell Aaron and Hur this was their mission. Moses, go hold this up over your head. But he knew Moses wouldn't be able to maintain it in that moment. God didn't allow him to. He needed the others to come beside of him and to lift him up. Give him a place to sit down, lift his hands up, and hold him there until the going down of the sun. Can you imagine trying to hold your hands up? Doing it for a few minutes like this, it's not that big of a deal. Even with my shoulder not feeling great, it's not that big of a deal. But an hour from now, probably half an hour from now, if not sooner, I'm going to get very tired. And the more it goes, this went on all day. So they helped hold his hands up, helping him be obedient to the Lord, doing their job and supporting God's man to get him up and keeping him up. As long as they did that, Israel won the battle. And Joshua discomforted Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. It still took the sword, didn't it? Notice that. The sword wasn't enough without Moses obeying God. Now this act within itself means nothing. I can do it all day long and nothing's going to happen. It was the obedience to God that made the difference. And because he was obedient to what God told him to do, even though it didn't make any sense. How does this make any sense on winning a battle, right? It makes none from a military standpoint. But he was obedient to God, even through something that made no sense. His guys came alongside of his brother on one side or on the other and helped him, even though it made no sense to them either. But they were seeing the proof up on that hill, watching and seeing, oh, we're winning now. We're losing. Okay. We're winning now. Oh, we're losing. So they saw with their own eyes what was going on. Don't you think that caused them? Surely it caused them to trust in God for the next time. Because we do know that the people of Israel, the next time, they fall away again. When things got rough, when their doubts started consuming them, they took their eyes off of God one more time and put their eyes on something else, even to the point of trying to worship another God. And so Israel, just like we do, we constantly turn our backs to God when times get rough, when we should be keeping our eyes on him and keeping our focus on him, even more than ever. And we should be able to look back at our history and say, well, God got me through that. So I know He's going to get me through this. Somehow, some way. Even if it's through death, He will get us through it and get us to a better place. So, and that's something that's real for us right now, thinking about my mom, and here I am. I can't do nothing except pray. You know, I'm away. Not that I could do anything if I was there, except pray, but at least I could be there. I could see her. But I simply have to trust God. And whether she lives or she dies, it doesn't really matter as far as my trust in God goes. He's looking out for her. If she dies, she's better off. Her pain is gone. Her physical ailments are all gone. And if she lives, it's better for me. It's better for our family because we get to still a chance to see her, a chance to talk to her when I call her. And so we're hoping for that, but no matter what happens, God will take care of the situation. So here they are holding this up. And so Joshua is winning, but still having to use the sword along with the other men in order to carry out. If they just went out there and stood there in front of the other people while Moses did this, more likely they would have been killed because they weren't doing their part. They had to do their part as well. And the Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in a book and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua. For I will utterly put out of remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And so he tells them to write it, tells them to rehearse it or to repeat it to Joshua. What was God doing? He was getting Joshua ready to become the next leader. God knew what was going to happen. Moses didn't know at this point. Joshua didn't know at this point, but God knew. And He was using Moses to help get him ready. Remind him of this. Remind him of this amazing thing, of what I did for you all. So that he doesn't forget. That he's not confused and think that maybe it happened because of his sword. And man, as a man of war, a man who was going into battle and facing people and winning, it would be so easy for him to start getting the idea that, man, I'm great. I'm a great warrior. Nobody can stand against me and my sword. You know? But we don't ever see that out of Joshua. We see he was a young man when things got started. And as he goes on and gets older, we never see that kind of arrogance out of Joshua. His dependence was always focused on obeying what Moses said on behalf of God. So he was obeying his leader, and he was obeying ultimately God and trusting in Him through that. And so Amalek will be put out from remembrance from under heaven. Now I was doing a little research trying to find out are the Amaleks gone now? There's still some around? No one really knows. Some believe that there's still some Amalek ancestors scattered throughout the world, but the country is, of course, no more. The people as a whole is no more. Others, would say that there's probably none left. We don't know for sure. There is a Jewish tradition that says that the Amaleks are actually what is now the German people. They all ended up going and starting over basically on the land that is now Germany. And so he believed that so much that one of the rabbis, when I guess it was before World War I, when the Kaiser Wilhelm came to visit Israel, all the religious leaders came out to meet him because they felt like he was a great man and was deserving of respect. One rabbi says, I will not go meet him. And it's like, why? He says, because I believe he is an Amalek, and God tells us not to have anything to do with the Amaleks. And so he refused to go and see this man. He believed it so much. Now, whether it's true or not, we don't know. It's just Jewish tradition. The Bible doesn't tell us, so it doesn't matter. Just interesting, I thought. And so as it says, and Moses built an altar and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi. For he said, because of the Lord hath sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. And Jehovah Nissi simply means my banner, or God is my banner. Or we would think of maybe a flag. And so it is God that helps to wave that flag. He's waving the flag of God before the people of Amalek and whoever. That's how they conquered this country and how they survived throughout all this time. So his faith in God, I would say never wavered, but we do know it got to a point where he lost his temper, hit the rock twice, disobeyed God. He was, of course, frustrated with the people many times. You read throughout the whole account here, there's many times that Moses was frustrated. And I found it's interesting because there were times that God said, I'm through with these people. They're stiff-necked people. They're not listening to me. I'm through with them. I'm going to destroy them all and just use you and start over again. And Moses would plead on their behalf. No, God, you promised that you would make them a great people. No, God. And he would plead on their behalf. And God listened. And there were other times that Moses went to God and said, God, just get rid of them. I can't handle this anymore. They are stiff-necked people. They're not listening to me. Ultimately, they're not listening to you. I just get rid of them. And God was like, no. We're going to fix things, or we're going to get things right. So it seemed like there's this back and forth going between the two. But it's interesting that God would calm him down sometimes, and then God would listen to him on his behalf. No, that he changed God's mind. Some would say yes, some would say no. But I think it's definitely a test for Moses to see, are you going to stand up for the people? Are you going to be a true leader? Are you going to, what are you going to do? I don't know what the reason is, but there were times that God would get fed up with them, as he does us. When we turn our backs on God, I can only imagine the times God is saying, after all I've done for you, Terry, after everything I've walked you through, you don't trust me now? Really? So let's always keep our faith in God no matter what the situation is in our lives. Let's pray. Dear precious and heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this day. We thank you so much, Father, for the lessons that we can learn, how Moses reacted with you, and learn both the good and the bad, and how Joshua obeyed. Help us, Father, to be obedient to you in all things. Help us, Lord, to never lose our faith in the fact that you are taking care of us, even through our pain and suffering. Whatever that pain and suffering is, whether it be physical, emotional, financial, whatever it is, Father, we can trust in you in all things to get us through. Help us just to lean on you. Even more in the dark times. Let us not forget about you in the good times either. It is only because of you that we have those good times. So help us not to turn our backs on you when things are good, when everything's going the way we want it to. But just trust you even more as well, knowing there will be bad times ahead. And we will need you again to get us through those. So Father, I do pray you be with our church. Help us, Father, to be the church that you want us to be, to reach out to the people around us, invite people we know to church, try to encourage people to get involved, and simply try to grow as Christians ourselves and grow as servants so we become even stronger for your name's sake. The days keep turning dark in the way that they seem to be. We know that we're going to need that trust in you more than we ever have before in the days to come. And Father, even if things get better and there's a great revival that breaks out, we will still need you. And help us to praise you in those times. Always remember